Welcome everyone to the 2024, I have to remind myself what year it is, Citizens Law School, and this is our first session. Citizens Law School, I tried to do a little bit of research before we started. Probably was started somewhere around in 1995 by a longtime Missoula attorney, Larry Riley. Larry passed away in 2020. He worked for the Garlington law firm here in Missoula, graduated from law school in 1966. And then his firm kept this program alive. It was done every 2 years. The state bar has picked it up. The Law Related Education Committee has taken over Larry's torch to keep citizens of Montana informed about the legal community. Initially, Larry started the program and it was kind of focused on Missoula, and we're really trying to take it statewide. And so our first session is going to be a day in the life of the judge, of a Montana state judge. Next week is a session on family law. After that is a session on criminal law. Property rights is next after that. Artificial intelligence in October 30th. Rights under the Montana Constitution is the next one. The federal judiciary in November, and then also some youth Supreme Court cases about the presidency will end a series on November 20th. So thanks for being here. And we have a panel of judges, and I would like to introduce them to you. The first one is Judge Menahan. He was elected in 2012. He is a judge in the Montana First Judicial District, which includes Lewis and Clark and Broadwater counties. And Judge, maybe when we get to you, that's an interesting thing. And I think Judge Fehr, only has one county, but then you and the other, and Judge Snipes Ruiz have multiple counties. So you guys could talk about that when we get to it. You've served as district court judge since 2013. Before taking the bench, Judge Menahan served 2 terms in the Montana House of Representatives and was a deputy Lewis and Clark County attorney for 18 years. Judge Fehr grew up, actually, Judge Fehr, if you just want to wave, that's Judge Fehr. I don't know if it's on the same spot on my screen as everybody else. Judge Fehr grew up in Billings, Montana. She attended the University of Montana for her undergraduate as well as law school. Judge Fehr practiced with the law firm of Moulton Bellingham and was an assistant U.S. attorney prior to being appointed to the bench. In March of 2018, Judge Fehr was appointed to fill a vacancy in the district court in the 13th Judicial District, Yellowstone County. Judge Fehr currently carries a full caseload of civil and criminal matters and presides over a treatment court, the SOAR Court, she'll talk more about that, and the Family Recovery Court in Yellowstone County. Judge Fehr also serves on the Sentence Review Division, Criminal Jury Instruction Commission, Civil Jury Instructions Commission, and District Court Counsel for State of Montana, and she'll probably talk about that when work-life balance comes up. That's a lot. Judge Snipes Ruiz, maybe a little wave. There you go. Thanks. Good. Judge Ruiz is a district court judge in the 12th Judicial District. She was appointed by Governor Bullock in January 2019. She originally hails from Great Falls, Montana, and attended undergraduate at Montana State University. She has in your Go Cats, which I find really hard to say, but I will. When the judge puts it in there, you have to read it. Go Cats. And attended law school at Gonzaga University in Spokane. After law school, she returned to Montana, spent her entire career on the High Line, and I imagine she'll talk about probably hard to get people to come back to the High Line and be attorneys up there. So thanks, judges, for being here. Really appreciate it. And the first one I'm going to throw to Judge Snipes Ruiz is, how did you become a judge? And then you all can tell us how you became judges.
Sure. Thank you, Brian. So I became a judge in a situation where our previous district court judge retired rather abruptly. And so it was a situation where I was the regional public defender for the Office of the State Public Defender at the time. From a personal standpoint, it wasn't the most convenient time to go through the judicial nomination process. When I got on the bench, my daughter was 5 months old. She was so little at the time. And it was a situation where I kind of looked around along the High Line and said, well, what's going to be the best for our community? And so I went ahead and went for it. I went through the Judicial Nomination Committee process when that was still a functioning body. And so I did an interview with them and then an interview with Governor Bullock. and got the phone call. It was a very quick, once I got that phone call, it was very quick to get to the bench because not only was I the regional public defender, but I was also supervising all the public defenders in a 6-county radius. And so I needed to keep my hands off of as many cases as I could and just get on the bench as quickly as possible. Everyone always says 2020 was a tough year for me. 2019 was probably the toughest year because I was trying to figure out how to be a judge in a relatively busy district that spans a good space. And so that's how I ended up on the bench.
It would not be a Zoom call without someone saying, "Hey, you're on mute." And I realize I'm on mute, but Judge Fehr, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Jessica Fehr. I've been a district court judge since April 2nd, 2018. I followed a similar trajectory as Judge Snipes Ruiz, and that is that I applied, went through the nomination committee when it was still active, was interviewed by Governor Bullock, and then was appointed. My practice before that, I was an assistant United States attorney in the Billings division. And so there I prosecuted federal white collar crimes, some violent crime on our Native American reservations. I did drug work as far as prosecuting larger drug syndicates. I did appellate work, arguing and briefing before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And I loved the work. But the problem was I was in trial a lot. And I had, at the time that I left the U.S. Attorney's Office, I had 2 little boys. And I thought, I'm going to choose a slower pace and I'm going to go back to private practice. So I returned to Moulton Bellingham, which is a firm here in Billings where I had started. And I developed a practice where I did criminal defense on the federal side as a member of the CJA panel, which is like the Office of Public Defender in Montana, in that we are appointed to represent indigent federal criminal defendants and then represent them throughout their federal cases. I also had a medical malpractice defense practice. So I represented hospitals, physician groups, individual physicians, physician insurance companies when they were sued for malpractice. I also brought the regulatory information I had garnered as an assistant U.S. attorney. And so I also did regulatory compliance for hospital groups, including Stark and anti-kickback analysis. So I had a really diverse practice. It was a really busy practice. I enjoyed it a lot. And I did that for 5 years as a partner at Moulton Bellingham. And when the position came open in Yellowstone County, I really wrestled with it. I had found a job I loved. I was making a good living for my family. And I blame my parents for this, as well as way too many episodes of Law and Order in my formative years. I missed feeling like maybe I was giving something back to the community, more so than being on boards, donating to charities. I missed feeling like I was improving the city that I love and that I grew up in. And so I applied. My partners were very mad at me. And I honestly didn't think that I had a chance. And so I too got my phone call from Governor Bullock, who was incredibly self-deprecating himself. And it was a very funny conversation where I asked him if he was sure. And he said, "I think so." And so that was how my judicial career started. And I too, you only have 30 days by statute when you're appointed. So I was appointed. I had to close my really diverse practice at Moulton Bellingham in 30 days and be sworn in. And then I was immediately on the ballot. So I had to be on the ballot in November of 2018 to be retained by the citizens. And then myself, along with 4 other judges in Yellowstone County, are all on the ballot this year for retention in Yellowstone County.
Judge Menahan, last but not least, but also if you could then also add on how your life changed when you went from an attorney to judge.
Okay. So I want everybody to realize that Montana's judges are elected. They're only appointed when there is a vacancy or if the legislature establishes a new judicial position, which they've done in Montana's larger counties in recent years. In 2010, Lewis and Clark County got a new judge, and they wrote that law so that the person would be elected. However, there are circumstances in which the legislature passed a law to establish a new judge and a judge gets appointed. So I'm different than the other two judges in that I ran for this position in 2012. I ran unopposed. Dorothy McCarter had been a judge in Helena for almost 24 years and she retired. And so I filed for the position. There had been two recent judgeships in Helena that had been very contested races. In 2008, Judge Tom Hansel retired after serving about 24 years on the bench. And I think there were 6 or 7 attorneys who ran for it. In 2010, the legislature created a new judicial position in Helena. There were 5 attorneys who ran for it, and Jim Reynolds got elected. And then in 2012, Dorothy McCarter opened up a spot, or she retired. I ran for it and was elected. I ran unopposed. I think all the attorneys who wanted to be a judge had got it out of their system, and I was able to run unopposed. So before I was a judge, I was a prosecutor at the Lewis and Clark County Attorney's Office. I did that for 18 years. I did a wide array of cases, primarily violent crimes, a lot of felony DUIs and negligent homicides and things of that nature. I prosecuted all the felony domestic violence cases for 15 years and served on the local board of the Friendship Center, which was a domestic violence shelter. So I was familiar with a lot of the material that we see in the district court in terms of criminal law, youth in need of care cases, dependency, neglect cases, and I used to handle a lot of the civil involuntary commitment for people suffering from a mental illness. So I spent a lot of time in court prior to being elected to the bench. As far as my life has changed a lot, I think that judges tend to lead pretty insular lives. I live about a mile from the courthouse. I walk to and from work every day. It's my quiet time. I can listen to the radio in my headphones as I walk to and from work, listen to the news, listen to music. And then I use the back staircases. I go into my office, and then for the rest of the day, I'm either working on orders or I'm in court presiding over cases. So I tend not to socialize much with many people. I have a garden. I spend a lot of time, doing sort of quiet things at home when I'm not working. As judges, I think we're well known in the community, but we don't participate in a lot of events once we take the bench, and that's certainly true of me, of my life.
Judge Fehr, could you pick it up and kind of tell us what changed for you too?
Sure. I think for me, the biggest singular change was you go from advocating for clients. So whether I was an assistant U.S. attorney or I was representing hospital groups, I was an advocate. That's what a lawyer does. So whatever your client's position is, whatever you're fighting about, whatever the contract negotiations are, you're advocating on behalf of your client. That's what we do. As a judge, you are not an advocate. And so the shift in the way my brain worked, the way I walked into situations, the way I analyzed cases, the way I analyzed facts, it all had to shift. And it had to shift from, I'm not advocating on behalf of anyone. I am the neutral arbiter of the facts. My job is to apply the law that exists to the facts as presented. So I went from being someone a bit type A OCD, who I knew my cases inside and out. I knew the good, the bad, the ugly, to being a judge where I only know what the parties tell me. I only know what's presented through evidence. So like a jury, they'll hear a case and they'll think, I feel like something is missing, or I feel like I'm not getting all the facts. That's really how a judge is. We only know what is presented in court through the pleadings, through the testimony and exhibit. And so you go from being an attorney that likes to feel like they know all of the facts and can walk in and present and advocate on behalf of a client, to being someone that simply has to be patient and listen and wait and hope that the advocates in front of you are able to present all that information to you. So I will admit the first year or two, there was some frustration on my part as I waited for them to get to the point, or give me the good stuff, or why aren't you I know there's more to this story. Why aren't you telling me the rest of the story? And so that took some adjustment. And I agree with Judge Menahan. It was a shift socially as well. I was a very social person in the bar in Yellowstone County. I was involved in a lot of committees, on a lot of charity boards. And in order to be a neutral and in order to be able to hear everything that comes before you, I do think it's very important that as a judge, we pull back. We not necessarily isolate ourselves, but are very mindful of what we do, who we choose to be seen with, who we choose to hang out with. Plus, I'm a single mom of 3 boys under the age of 14. So they keep me pretty darn busy. But I agree. I do think that the judges have to be mindful about our associations and what we do in the community so that we can be that neutral party, the neutral person in the community.
Judge Snipes Ruiz, could you give us an idea how your life changed?
Sure. So for me, it was a significant shift, especially in a small community. So the 12th Judicial District covers Havre, Fort Benton, and Chester, all by, even Montana standards, pretty small towns. It's difficult because, you get stopped in the grocery store, you get stopped on the street. Everyone wants to talk to you. Everyone wants to glad hand with you. Everyone wants to maybe tell you about their cases. And you just have to try to steer clear of folks and it is a definite shift, especially if you're an extrovert like me. I think I miss spending time with members of the bar for sure, because as a small bar along the High Line, everyone is pretty social with each other, even if they're on different sides of the table. And so it's one of those things where I would agree with both judges that it's definitely a shift.
Judge Manahan, why don't you let us kind of give us an idea day to day what happens? And I don't know if Cindy is still your clerk in the courtroom.
Yeah.
But if you could tell us kind of who you have helping you and what that looks like on a day to day.
So most judges have essentially a clerk or judicial assistant, somebody who schedules matters for them in the courtroom and may work on minute entries and drafting, helping us draft our orders. And then we have a law clerk, somebody who works behind the scenes and helps conduct research for us and work on drafts of orders. The law clerk allows us, I think, to look in depth into a particular case, or they have the opportunity to do so because we often don't have the time, and then report back to us with their findings. As far as day to day goes, we schedule jury trials nearly every week for Mondays. Not every case, of course, goes to trial, but our day to day lives are kind of dictated by the rhythm of the cases that are going to trial. So we schedule trials on Monday. If they don't go to trial, then we have set behind them hearings in family law cases, in youth in need of care matters, in contested civil cases where we might have oral argument or an evidentiary hearing on something, evidentiary hearings on criminal matters like petitions to revoke. On Wednesday every week, I have what's called criminal law in motion. So for about 3 hours, I have initial appearances, arraignments, hearings on petition to revoke, bail hearings, sentencing hearings, things of that nature, all in criminal matters. And sometimes that can take all morning, as it did today. And then on Wednesday afternoons, I do uncontested civil. I do all my probate hearings. I handle all of the probate matters for Lewis and Clark County. Kathy Seeley does the youth court cases. Judge Abbott has a treatment court, and Judge McMahon does guardianships. So we kind of break up some of the work a little bit that way, so that all the probate cases are just handled by one judge, and it makes things a little simpler, as it's doing all the youth court cases before Judge Seeley. So then Thursday, I have more hearings scheduled. Typically Fridays, we go to Townsend. So usually to get scheduled into court requires some doing because I have so many things scheduled. You have to work really closely with my clerk in order to get things calendared so that attorneys can come in and have their cases heard. And whenever I'm not on the bench, I'm drafting orders based upon the evidence that I heard in whatever case it was, whether it was an evidentiary hearing in a petition to revoke or findings of fact in a family law case.
Judge Menahan, there are 4 judges in Helena, right?
Correct. 4 judges in Lewis and Clark, and the first judicial district goes out to Townsend, although, you know, the vast majority of our work, 90+% of it is filed in Lewis and Clark County, but there's 4 of us here. So the workload division varies from judicial district to judicial district. Somebody like Judge Snipes Ruiz is going to do everything. And there's no division of labor in the 12th judicial district. I suspect there is down in Yellowstone County. It's somewhat akin to Lewis and Clark.
That is a perfect transition to Judge Snipes Ruiz, and then we'll get to the great 8 when we get to Judge Fehr. So Judge Snipes Ruiz.
Sure, thank you. So because I have to split my time between 3 counties, we have to be really, really mindful of our schedule. So almost every Monday is criminal law and motion day in Hill County. On Wednesdays, we do civil in Hill County. In the mornings, we reserve that for uncontested matters. In the afternoon, we do all the youth in need of care matters. Not only with my youth in need of care cases, and for folks that don't know what that is, it's when CPS is involved and is removing children from homes. I have to coordinate actually with the judges that are in the surrounding districts because we're using the same public defenders. And so if my neighbor judge decides that, you know, on Glacier County Day that things are going to go long, it affects my docket because those same attorneys need to be in my court. So we coordinate with Glacier County and make sure that we have that ironed out. Every other Tuesday, I go to Fort Benton. On the Tuesdays that I don't go to Fort Benton, we usually reserve that for whatever family law cases need to happen or evidentiary issues that might pop up that are a little more lengthy. On the 3rd Wednesday of every month, I go to Chester and take care of Liberty County, and that's varied. And then Thursdays in the morning, we usually do orders of protection, anything kind of that urgent that has come up along the way in the week. Whether that's, like I said, order of protection hearings. I also do involuntary commitments for our district. And then in the afternoon, every other week, we do treatment court. And so I preside over the 12th Judicial District Treatment Court, which is a dual court. It's a DUI court and a drug court track. And we also, in addition to taking felony offenders, we also take misdemeanor offenders as well. And so, yeah, we run about 25 participants at any given time through that program. Fridays, I try to save those for drafting, but it doesn't always work out so well.
Judge Fehr, how is it being one of 8 judges in Billings?
It is a negotiation at all times. It's, you know, it's 8 high functioning type A personalities. And so, you know, in Yellowstone County, there are 8 judges and there are 8 different ways that things are done. We do not divvy up responsibilities. Every one of us gets allegedly 1/8 of every type of case. And so I carry between 3,200 and 3,500 cases at any given time. And that's everything from juvenile offenders, criminal offenders as adults, divorces, parenting plans, dependent and neglect cases. I'm lucky. I have a dependent and neglect treatment court. So I run the family recovery court, where we are a specialized court that offers services to families to stabilize them, help them with sobriety, and hopefully provide reunification with their children in a sustainable way. And in that court, We usually have between 20 and 25 families, and depending on how many kiddos are in each case, we've run upwards of 60 total participants. So that's a busy one. And I also run the SOAR Court, Seize Opportunity and Recovery, which is a first-time felon diversion court. So for people who find themselves for the first time charged with a felony, and that felony is related to addiction, so a first-time possession of drugs, a theft, perhaps where they were stealing in order to beat a drug habit, you have an opportunity, if you can successfully complete my court, not only do you never change your plea, and your case is actually dismissed at the time that you enter the court, but then when you successfully complete in 2 years, sober, stable, and law-abiding, with all the tools to remain as such, your case is dismissed with prejudice, meaning you never have to say you were convicted of a felony, you've never changed your plea, you never have to worry about that popping up on NCIC, and that really gives people an opportunity at a fresh start when addiction is at the root. There are lots of drug courts in Billings. Judge Nisley runs 2, Judge Souza runs 1, Judge Harris runs a drug court. You know, we're the biggest city in Montana, so with that population comes a lot of cases. So we are very busy. We are asking for more judges this session because we just continue to have to delay hearings, trials, all the rest of it, because we just don't, there's not enough hours in the day.
On the treatment court piece, I know Judge Snipes Ruiz and you have that. Can you give everyone an idea of how that looks different than the calling a case and how involved you are and what kind of information you have? And maybe Judge Snipes Ruiz, you can add to that as well.
So I have the 2 treatment courts are both booked for both afternoons. It's from Wednesday at 1 o'clock till the end of the day, and then Thursday at noon till the end of the day. So what that looks like is I staff with my treatment team, which is treatment professionals, mental health professionals, drug and alcohol testing companies, probation officers, and then a defense lawyer and a prosecutor, as well as a coordinator. And we staff each and every participant. And what that means is we talk about how was their week? Are there things we can work on? Are there things that maybe didn't go well? What are some corrective actions? Is there a project we need them to do? Some sort of what's called a sanction or an incentive based on how they performed that week. And then we then meet with all of the participants. So what that means is, by best standards, I spend between 3 and 5 minutes. I talk too much, so sometimes it's longer than that, with each one of my participants. And that means I'm sitting across the table. I'm in my robe, but it's much less formal than a standard proceeding. They're sitting across the table from me, and we have a conversation. And we have a conversation about what happened, good week, bad week, okay week, what are their needs, what are their barriers, what can we do to help them, what can we do to brainstorm dealing with those issues, like rent. How am I going to pay my rent at Sober Living? I need a job, but nobody will work around my treatment schedule. And we're able to kind of brainstorm those issues. It is by far the most rewarding part of my job. I think that it is some of the best success stories come out of our treatment courts. It is the best use of taxpayer dollars. We are actually giving people solutions and opportunities and meaningful recovery. And what I always say, if you can't make it in a treatment court, then that's someone where I really am okay with a DOC sentence, with a Department of Corrections sentence, because we always say it's easy to get into drug courts, but it's real hard to get out, because we don't give up on people. And we have such amazing resources, such great support. Governor Gianforte has been amazing. He's been a huge proponent of treatment courts and has really made sure that we're funded. But it's really the most rewarding stuff that I do. So my days are crazy. They're long. I work nights and weekends, but I would never give up a treatment court in order to make my days shorter, because that's the stuff that feeds your soul as a judge. Whereas the other stuff can get a little bit heavy. So I love my treatment courts, if you can't tell, Brian.
Judge Snipes Ruiz,
Sure.
tell us about yours.
Yeah, absolutely. I would echo much of what Judge Fehr said, because these treatment courts are evidence-based practices. And so we adhere to best standard evidence-based practices. And so as far as the functional part part of it, we do staffing. I spend, 3 to 5 minutes with each participant. What I would add to, and what I tell people when they say, well, what is treatment court? Well, in a traditional criminal case, I usually see defendants 3 times. I see them for their initial appearance, I see them for their change of plea, and I see them for their sentencing. Maybe I'll see them for something else if things aren't going so smooth, but really, realistically, I'm only seeing defendants 3 times throughout the entirety of a, 9-month case. In a treatment court, even if our participants do everything perfect, I see them 26 times. So you're really building a rapport with them. You're investing your energy, is probably a good way to put it, into and investing in their recovery. And so the evidence-based practice shows that if judges are enthusiastic and are really adhering to that and investing in participants, the recidivism rates of those participants are significantly lower. And so it's one of those things where I absolutely echo what Judge Fehr says, because it is a joy. It's my favorite part of my week, doing treatment court, because we are changing lives. We're changing generational trauma is what I see a lot of. Having been the public defender up here for, the years leading into my judicial, some of the folks that are in my treatment court, I defended their parents. I saw that they were removed by their parents when they were kids, and now they're before me, for other cases. And you see that, having been in a community of this size for this amount of time. And so I think we're making strides in breaking that generational trauma, and with the hope that that their kids will have a better life. And that's something that really brings me a lot of joy.
And Judge Menahan, I don't think you have a treatment court, but I did hear at one point you might have been the busiest judge in the state. You had the highest caseload. Can you, and maybe
I
that's
think
wrong.
so. No, I think that was correct for a while. I think
Can you
Judge
tell us,
Moses and Billings and I were vying for that, in part because
tell us
I
about
had
that?
all the probate cases in Lewis and Clark County. So Lewis and Clark County is a pretty big district in terms of, the number of cases per judge. Because I had all the probate cases, that added to my workload, and those cases tend to stay open a longer period of time because people don't settle the estate necessarily in a timely fashion. Sometimes takes a few years to sell all the property and that kind of thing. So yeah, I guess I think all of us judges are busy in a way, in our own way. In your rural counties, judges are a circuit judge, essentially traveling from county courthouse to county courthouse, and they spend a lot of driving time, to get to their various courthouses. Whereas, those of us who are in urban districts are spending a lot more time in the courthouse, just trying to accommodate the number of cases. So I think it's the workload, I would say, is pretty evenly divided amongst all 51 district court judges around the state. I think we have, on average, I think that the judicial branch is fairly transparent in trying to provide information to the public about what we do. And there's a dashboard on the state Supreme Court website that actually allows you to look at the court filings broken down to each county. And there are roughly 56,000 cases handled in the Montana's district courts every year. And that's largely civil, criminal, family law, a handful of other types of cases, a number of different types of cases. And that is spread amongst 51 district court judges around the state. So it gives you an idea how many cases that we all are resolving. Surprisingly, I mean, a very small minority of those cases wind up getting appealed to the Montana Supreme Court. I would say that the Supreme Court affirms district court judges on a pretty regular basis, probably about 80% of the time. I think that the work that we're doing is difficult. We're solving problems. None of these cases that you've heard us discuss are happy ones. Occasionally we get to do an adoption and we all start crying and they wonder what's wrong with us because, we're bursting into tears at some little kid who's grabbing the court's microphone to sing the theme song from Frozen. because, we don't get to preside over very many happy cases. But I would just say that Montana District Court judges are resolving problems in your community and doing it in a way that's consistent with the law, based upon the facts of the case, and that the vast majority of people, although they may not agree with the decision that we've made, understand it. And we're a crucial component, I think, to Montana's economy and just the fabric of life in our communities.
Judge Fehr, Judge Menahan had talked about adoptions being a happy time. Can you tell us kind of, and you've talked about treatment court, but what's the best time and the worst time of being a judge since you've been a judge?
I think the thing that I had done violent crime in what we call Indian country as an assistant U.S. attorney. And so obviously I had experience with victims' families, and dealing with that trauma. But having to preside over either a trial or a sentencing where you have either a child victim or a parent or guardian of a child victim testify, it is very difficult to hear that and then to figure out, how do I go on with whatever else is in my day? How do I go on having heard this, having sat in those emotions, and at the same time holding the fate of another human in your hands? And that is, when I'm imposing sentence, there are so many factors that we have to take into account. And so it is, I think, an art and something that requires a lot of energy for us to focus on what the legislature has given us as guidance for appropriate sentence, and to not be overcome by those emotions, because it can be very overwhelming. And then I think trying to figure out, how do I process this, and how do I go home to my 3 kids? How do I go about life and not be horrified and, be the overprotective helicopter mother and say, you're not going anywhere and you're not doing anything, because the world is a terrible, dangerous, scary place. And so I think that's an important part of what we have to figure out. I love Judge Menahan's walk to court, walk to work, and walk home, because you do need that kind of quiet pause. For me, I get up at 5 o'clock every morning and ride my Peloton until my legs hurt, because that's my cleansing quiet time. The best part of my job is when we have those success stories, and whether those are the amazing adoptions where you see a family be chosen. A lot of us are born into families, and we're stuck with who we're stuck with. And to see someone choose a family, to see someone choose to bring a child into their home, is pretty breathtaking. And honestly, again, I think it's why I'm so passionate about my treatment courts, to see families reunited. We recently had a graduation in my family recovery court of a father who has gotten sober. His wife came into the court as his partner, and they divorced in the court, and she was unable to remain sober. And this father has stepped up, has been sober for 2.5 years, has been sole caretaker and parenting his 4 children. He is a Native American gentleman who has embraced his culture, who has created all kinds of new cultural opportunities for sobriety in our community that didn't exist, for a culture that sometimes feels left out in a typical Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous meeting. And so seeing him graduate, seeing his children there, and hearing his 14-year-old daughter tell him, I love you, Dad, and I'm proud of you. Those are moments where it's like, okay, I can do this. I can do another 11-page law in motion calendar, which for the non-lawyers, that is like Night Court. If anybody remembers that show with Bull and the crazy judge, and you never know what's going to walk in the door. That is what law in motion is. It is Yellowstone County's version of Night Court. So those are the things that I think keep us going.
Judge Snipes Ruiz, give us an idea of what's the best and worst about your job.
Sure. I would echo Judge Fehr's sentiments with regard to criminal sentencings and having to sit on those. I also find it very difficult in those situations because, again, you're just given the information that is provided through the pre-sentence investigation report and by the attorneys. You're not really given everything. And so you're expected to make a determination based on the information given. And I tell folks frequently, I don't want to sound flippant, but I call balls and strikes. I do my best, but it's tough and it weighs on you. I would also say that family law is very difficult when folks come in and they are, trying to work through how to co-parent after no longer being together. And they're looking to the court saying, you fix it. That's a really tough situation because I don't know their children. I don't know, I don't know who these kids are. And so you're just given the information and you do your best to hopefully come up with something that everyone can live with, essentially. So family law cases are very difficult. I am very grateful that I was one of the three, I think there was 3 or 4 courts that piloted the IDRT program, which stands for Informal Domestic Relations Trials. And it's geared specifically towards self-represented litigants, so folks that come before the court in family law cases that don't have attorneys. It's supposed to make that trial process a little bit easier because most of the time folks that are not attorneys don't know how to, for example, lay foundation for evidence and those kinds of things. And so what the IDRT program has done for me is it has allowed me to be more efficient and be able to get through those cases a little sooner, because I also realize that justice deferred is justice denied. It's a situation where if these cases are sitting on the back burner for whatever reason, that folks are kind of waiting, and we don't want folks to wait any longer than they have to. So
If people have, we're going to talk to Judge Menahan here in a second about how long cases take, but if people have questions, you can put them in the chat. We can't answer all of them, but if we do have time, we'll get to them. But Judge Menahan, could you talk a little bit how come some cases take longer than others? I think sometimes people are surprised about how long maybe a civil case takes or versus a criminal case.
Yeah, so some civil cases are often complicated cases that require a great deal of investigation. However, a lot of that investigation doesn't take place until after the parties file their complaint. Filing the complaint begins the legal process. So after they file the complaint, then they start collecting their discovery. They depose their witnesses, they send questions to the other side, they find expert witnesses to handle their cases. So in civil cases, oftentimes the parties aren't prepared to go to trial until sometimes a couple of years have elapsed. And then when they are ready, then they start filing motions that slow the process down and take up a lot of work for the judges. In criminal cases, the defendant has typically been arrested. And so the county attorney's office files the charging documents, brings that case to court, and they're typically mostly ready to go to trial, not always. Sometimes there's quite a lot of work that needs to be done in forensic evidence or interviewing parties and testing evidence and that kind of thing. So criminal cases usually go to trial in district court, I'd say within 3 to 6 months, sometimes longer. Sex cases often get delayed for various reasons. Those cases sometimes take as long as a year, but criminal cases resolve themselves sooner, many times, than civil cases. Short answer.
And Judge, there's probably also some statutes that make some cases more of a priority.
Yeah, so the Montana legislature has given criminal cases priority, as well as the dependency neglect cases, the child abuse and neglect cases, and civil involuntary commitments for a person suffering from a mental illness. So those cases wind up taking priority. So if you have a criminal case that's going to go to trial and a civil case is set behind it, or a family law matter where somebody may not have seen their child for a couple months and they want to have a hearing on a parenting plan or get some emergency relief from the court because they haven't seen their children, those cases get continued. We try to make them a priority, but if you have a criminal matter that's going to go to trial and it's going to take all week, everything on your docket is going to be canceled or continued for another time. So it's always an art to try to schedule these things so that everybody can have access to the courts.
Judge Fehr, hopefully your kids don't get involved in the youth court system, but if could you give us an idea of what like kid cases look like or in juvenile delinquency?
Oh, but there, but for the grace of God, go all of us, Brian. We'll see. The years are young. So the purpose of the Youth Court Act is to give juveniles, so anyone under the age of 18, the opportunity at rehabilitation without having it derail your entire life. So for the most part, when cases, whether charged as misdemeanors or felonies, are brought, they are before a district court judge. They work with youth court services. And I would say, at least in Yellowstone County, 75% of those cases are done informally through various methods called things like consent decrees, where they make an agreement with an administrative law judge who then is able to say, your case is going to be resolved if you don't break the law, you behave yourself, have no further violations for a period of 6 months. And then I never see the case again. If a child continues to have struggles and cannot do well on those more informal proceedings, then they have to come see me. And that would be done by filing a petition. Those can be for anything from partner family member assault to theft to burglary. Really any felony charge that you can think of can be brought as a Youth Court Act. There are certain cases, depending on, I know the statute was partially amended. I know there's more amendments that they're going to seek in the next session. There are certain types of charges when a juvenile is charged with them where the state can move to have those cases filed in district court. And then that means that the child is charged as an adult. There's then a process in place where there has to be what's called a transfer hearing, where a judge has to make a determination as to whether or not it is more appropriate and in the best interest of the child and the community that the matter remain in adult court or that the matter be transferred back to youth court. Obviously, the ramifications are huge. Under the Youth Court Act, you may only be incarcerated, so you may only be held in state custody until you turn 18. Pine Hills is where most of the boys end up if they're really, really naughty. But at 18, they're out. We have the opportunity in certain cases to extend jurisdiction where they can be on probation up until the age of 25. But really, jurisdiction for juveniles ends at 18. But if they are charged as an adult, then all of a sudden, the adult maximum charge is what applies. So for instance, I'm trying to think of a recent one that I had. Burglary, 20 years. So then the juvenile could be charged up to 20 years. So you could have a 16-year-old or a 15-year-old that then stays in Pine Hills in the youth institution until they turn 18, and then they're transferred to the Montana State Prison at the age of 18. Obviously, that has huge ramifications for the juvenile. In Yellowstone County, we unfortunately have had a spate of gun violence where juveniles are alleged to have been the perpetrators. And so we have had more transfer hearings in the last 6 months, I think any of us have had in our careers, because they are serious crimes, including assaults with a weapon and deliberate homicides, where juveniles are engaged. So 90% of those cases, though, are cases where we really can, I don't want to say scare them straight, but that is really what it is. We're hoping that their interaction with the system makes them realize they don't ever want to do this again. But there is a percentage where they will remain in the system.
And if I could just weigh in, because I get
please.
a lot of juvenile cases that are filed as adults. So even though Judge Seeley's handling the youth court matter, I get cases in which a youth is tried as an adult. And By and large, those are crimes of violence and they're sex crimes. So the juveniles that are tried as adults are typically tried for something that's pretty serious, less so property crimes.
Judge Snipes Ruiz, you said you were traveling today. You've got to a conference and you've got training next week and you've got 18 different counties. That's an exaggeration, maybe not. How do you keep all of this in the air? What's the work-life balance? I know we talked about it a little bit, but how do you maintain your sanity?
Sure. So it's a absolute credit to my staff. I have a fantastic law clerk. My law clerk works remotely out of Missoula. I believe he's actually might be connected today. So he's fantastic, and the efficiency benefit we've seen from him working remotely is that my previous law clerks traveled with me and, therefore endured all the windshield time. And because he works remotely, he does not do the windshield time. So while I was traveling back from a conference today, he was diligently working on things. And so it makes a big difference as far as keeping me up and running.
We
Uh,
called Scott a legal ninja.
yes,
So
yes, I would say that's a fair assessment. Um, Also, we just have to schedule things out. We're already scheduled out through December of 25. And so we make sure um, that we have all of our conferences, everything's going to be running smoothly. I also sit on the Montana Board of Crime Control. And so I have obligations with regard to that. And that's where I was earlier today as a board member at their conference. And uh, so it's just a lot of juggling and really trying to figure it out and making sure that we have space. We hold space for all of these things.
so far, no one's brave enough to ask a question. Getting towards the end, and I'll start with Judge Menahan. What are you most surprised that people don't know judges do? Just somebody on the street, and you're just surprised they don't know that's the things you do.
Well, I don't know that I'm I'm not surprised. I think most people have very little occasion to find themselves in their county courthouse. So I think most people um, wouldn't have an opportunity to spend much time in a court and understand what it is that we do. If they're called for jury duty, that's one place where there's a connection between the public and the court. And so I think people, when they're in called for jury duty and they're sitting with a panel of 80 other people, it's kind of a bewildering experience. My role as a judge, I think, is often to not only act as the neutral arbiter, as Judge Fehr had said, but also to explain to people how the process works and how the system works. I think part of the things that we do as a judge is try to educate the public a bit. And that oftentimes is the parties themselves. I had a sentencing hearing today on a felony DUI offender who didn't want to go to the mandatory 6-month inpatient treatment program that is available to him through the Department of Corrections. And he was asking for some alternative sentence. And I was explaining to him that the legislature doesn't give district court judges any leeway. We don't have any discretion. We have to impose the penalty that's provided. I had another case where it was an assault with a weapon case where a process server had been trying to serve papers on somebody who pulled out a firearm. And so in that particular case, I was not going to put this person into prison because he was 50 years old and 54 years old and didn't have any criminal history whatsoever. So my job is to kind of explain to the victim why the sentence that's being offered here is appropriate and consistent with what other people get. As far as to answer your question, I'd urge people to go into the courthouses and observe proceedings. Many people don't know the difference between the district court judges that that we are and courts of limited jurisdiction. Courts of limited jurisdiction in Montana would be your city courts, municipal courts, justice courts. The lawyers in those, or the judges in those cases, are not required to be attorneys under Montana law, except under certain circumstances. And by and large, they're not. but they handle small claims cases. They handle misdemeanor criminal and traffic and landlord tenant cases. It's very important what they do, and they have a huge caseload as well. And then we have the Montana Supreme Court, and those are justices at the Supreme Court are not seeing the folks that we see on a day-to-day cases, all these sad, cases that you've heard about. They're reading the records of our trial courts and determining whether or not we judges made a mistake in law. So we all occupy a different role in the system. And what surprises me, I guess, is that the public doesn't have a very good understanding of the difference between state and federal courts and the various level of courts within the Montana's, judicial system.
Judge Menahan, we do have a brave soul who asked a question, wanted to know if human trafficking cases were common in your jurisdiction.
I think this is probably a question more for Jessica. As I said, I prosecuted domestic violence cases. That was my specialty for 18 years. And I've been a judge for 12. And we don't see many human trafficking cases in Lewis and Clark County. It does happen. The facts of the cases are often ones that you may not really, it doesn't maybe necessarily neatly fit into what you might think of as human trafficking, but we do see them, but they're rare.
Judge Fehr, maybe you can answer both, kind of what surprises you that the public doesn't know about judges, and then also if this is a common case in your courtroom.
Yeah, so the human trafficking piece, I think, is an important piece. It is, I would say, in the last 4 years, become a touchstone at most trainings that we do, whether it's a component of it or an entire training circled around those issues. And we are seeing more of it in Yellowstone County. We are a hub. We are at the crossroads of the interstates. We are a major site for drug interdiction. And so we are seeing more and more of it. Unfortunately, our close proximity in Yellowstone County to the Northern Cheyenne on the Crow Indian Reservation, we are seeing more of it bleeding into those communities, unfortunately. We have screening tools that we are using in domestic violence cases. We have screening tools that we are using in our treatment courts. We are finding more and more of the young women and young men, generally under the age of 40, who have struggled with addiction and had their own history that maybe mirrors where they find themselves now. And so that is a home where maybe they were in the system, maybe they were removed, they grew up in the foster care system. We are finding that they have significant trafficking history, and there's more and more of it coming out. I have one young lady who's about to graduate from one of my courts who has taken it on as her restorative justice project and has done a podcast, has worked extensively with the division within DOC, where they have actually worked on targeting these organizations and getting the word out. She speaks in schools. It's amazing. And so I think there's really good tools that are being given to judges where we can start to identify and see risk factors and then get these people plugged in with amazing services. Surprising thing that I do that I don't think people know is I do a ton of search warrants. In the state of Montana, we have incredible protections on our individual privacy. We are a two-party recording state, which means your phone call, your conversation cannot be recorded without your permission unless a judge has issued a warrant. There's another good thing that came out of COVID besides Zoom and all of our comfort with it is we have this great computer application that we have on our phones that I have on my desktop at work. And I do search warrants at all hours. We unfortunately in Yellowstone County do not have a rotation, and I am Department 1, which means that I am the first number they call at 3:00 in the morning. So that is for blood draw warrants on if someone has been allegedly committed a DUI. They can have their blood drawn without their consent, but they have to have a warrant. So they have to call and wake me up and tell me why. And then either I say yes or no. You have to have a search warrant to search a house, to search a car, to search a bag, to do a DNA swab. So I think a lot of us judges do a fairly regular trade in reviewing of search warrants. Like I said, I probably do minimum 10 to 15 a week. And then once we review those documents with the sworn testimony of the law enforcement officers, then there's all the paperwork that comes with it, which is can be kind of time consuming. So I do a lot of search warrants.
Judge Snipes Ruiz, maybe you can bring us home, and to keep our work-life balance, we're at time, but go ahead. What do you have that surprises you people don't know about your position?
Well, I feel like folks probably don't know that we have to be creative problem solvers in a lot of situations. I was sharing an anecdote with Brian prior to this. You never know what's going to walk into court. You never know what situation you're going to end up with on any given day. I'm still surprised. This is my 6th year on the bench. So I was telling him an anecdote that a gal walked in for an involuntary commitment, and what she was wearing in February in Havre, Montana, was about 3 pairs of socks and some jail slides. And that footwear simply will not do in Havre, Montana in the winter. And so the public defender looks at me and he goes, "Well, what are we going to do, Judge? She doesn't have any shoes." Well, I went ahead and walked back into chambers and got her a pair of my UGG style slippers and brought them out and said, "Put them on her." And the public defender asked me, "Do you want these back, Judge?" I said, no, she obviously needs them more than I do. And so off they went to the state hospital. But it's one of those things where you just never know what's going to walk in the door on any given day. It's definitely a joy in that aspect.
You've missed the best part of that story.
That they were Batman slippers, and that I happen to be a Batman fan, and my previous colleague at the public defender's office had gifted me these Batman slippers, and so I brought them with me to my new office, and I just happened to have them, and there they were.
Well, thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. We're out of time. Thanks for being here, everyone. The next session is going to be on family law, October 9th, and hopefully everyone will attend that. But judges, thank you. Go back to life and get some sleep, take a walk, and watch some kids. So thanks again. Have a good night, everybody.